got an illustrious panel of people who know a lot more than I do. I'm going to try and kick a conversation around, but we're going to come to audience questions fairly early on because we want to hear what's important to you guys as well, rather than the musings of an economist. For intros, can we start on the end? Rowan, do you want to introduce yourself? We've got 2-3 minutes.
Sure. My name is Rowan Brand. I have an artist management company called RedGreenBlueCo. I look after a variety of artists, and at the moment my two focus artists are an Australian family band called Tiger Town, who are a 4-piece. They're putting out their debut EP tomorrow. So they're from Sydney, mostly based in America in terms of what they do. And I also look after a British trio called Bear's Den, who are just working on their second album at the moment. So they're much more European focused.
How did the first album go?
Pretty well. I think 50,000 copies in the UK, 120,000 worldwide. Big live touring business, big focus for them. But, about slow and steady wins the race for them.
Yeah, perfect. Roxanne, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. Hi, just clearing my throat there.
Perfect, it's good prep.
So my name's Roxanne Bastion. I'm an independent singer-songwriter. I released my debut album on my own label called Nomad Songs, and just released an EP on a small independent label. And I'm also on the board of the Featured Artists Coalition. So very much interested in from and for artists, and run a tiny little music conference, smaller than this, in London called From Me to You, which is also from and for artists.
Fantastic. And I realise we've accidentally split the kind of artist side of things and the major label side of things pretty evenly. Tim.
It's deliberate. My name's Tim Miles. I'm Director of Sync at Warner Music. My background, I started off playing in bands. I was signed to Virgin in my early 20s. We weren't very successful, but I sort of learned the industry from a band's perspective first. And then I went on to work in Sync, and I've been doing that for the last sort of 8 or 9 years. I sort of dip into management also, and I also run a little music festival on the side.
When do you sleep?
Tonight.
Excellent. So, instead we should go for beers.
But away from home.
Ruth, how you doing?
Very well. How are you?
Not bad.
So I'm Ruth Clark. I head up partnerships at Sony Music. Tim and I actually used to work together. Before Sony, I was at Warner's and EMI before that. I started out as a publicist, believe it or not, brand side of fence, worked with artists for a long time, flip-flop between agency and label, ended up in EMI about 5 years ago. Joined the Sony family about 12 months ago and now work across the entire family of labels. That's Columbia, RCA, Epic, Black Butter and Insanity, who are recent additions to our label family.
Fantastic. And I forgot to introduce myself, which is a bad habit. Chris Carey, CEO, Media Insight Consulting, maker-up of numbers if you pay me. Please don't tweet that. Roxanne, we're going to talk about making money. What's the easiest way you found as an artist? I don't think there are any easy ways, but the most time-effective, cost-effective, energy-effective way you found of making money?
Well, if you're an artist, that's not your first thought, right? You make music because that's what you have to do in life. And then you think, okay, if I want to do this, how do I do this? And there's no handbook, unfortunately. So it's a lot of, for me, it was just a lot of learning by doing, playing a lot of shows and making mistakes and learning from that. The bulk of my income is definitely live shows. And although I do have a band that accompanies me, if we're talking money, it's definitely easier to have very lucrative tours if you're a solo singer-songwriter and it's just you and your acoustic guitar and a suitcase. So I don't drive, so a lot of my tours are just literally very sort of backpacker style on trains and buses, and so my expenses I keep them very low, and therefore I can do that.
Fantastic. And then what do you find, you sell merch while you're on the road? Like what's the balance? So live obviously has the upside, you've got people in the room. What else do they buy from you while they're there?
Oh yeah, so definitely having physical product is still a massive part of that. So it's the live shows and then selling physical CDs or vinyl if you've got that at the shows. As in terms of digital income, the PRS check that comes a couple of times a year is always very, very nice. Always a very nice surprise as well. In terms of digital sales, I think if you're a small act, that's really just peanuts. And I'm definitely not against any streaming service or any digital platform that's trying to come up with new solutions. And I think for independent artists or up-and-coming artists, it's still a great tool just to be discovered and as a marketing tool. But that's not relevant to me in terms of like money making.
Okay, interesting. Sorry, for those not from the UK, PRS, ASCAP equivalent, Boomer, CI, SABAM, I won't go on. Worked in the international team far too long. Rowan, you've got a very young band with Tiger Town. You've got a more established or recently more established band in Bears Den. How does the revenue profile for a band change as they grow?
It always starts very small.
Gets bigger.
Yeah, and it grows over time. I think, the way that the way I work through decisions with the artists that I work with is based around, seeing what income we can make with certain opportunities, be it, touring or be it with hand stamping CDs, which is what we started with Bears Den before we had a label. Literally with a potato and an ink pad, and we'd sell them for £5 at a show. And these were all methods to bring income, but they were always measured against what we could afford to expend. And making money, it has to be about profit. And so trying to measure our decisions based upon our growth trajectory has been really important. So when you look at the Bears Den expenses now on a tour like we just did at the end of last year, it's a very different picture because we now have some more resources to be able to reinvest into a better quality show, better lights, better sound, more musicians, that kind of stuff. So we try and, with all my acts, try and build something that's sustainable. That means that if they don't get that single added to radio, or if something happens, then they can still continue to have a career. And stability's a really kind of core value of how we work together with the kinds of acts that I work with. So yeah, just kind of taking those things one step at a time, realizing what means you have, what you should be investing in, and kind of using that to grow your audience the whole time.
Fantastic. Tim, how important is sync to an artist? How does it work?
I think it's important to artists. I don't think it's important to all artists. I hate the word syncable, but I think that goes around a lot with managers and artists saying, this track's syncable. I think some artists, some songs lend themselves to sync more than others. I think the exciting thing about sync is the decisions are largely creative, so it doesn't really matter about your chart position or how many followers you have on Twitter, which is exciting, I think, for emerging artists, because we can actually go out and do some really meaningful syncs and make a difference. And I think that's where it can be really important to an artist, because actually it can perhaps break them through the barrier when perhaps radio isn't, or they're not connecting in other ways. But also inversely, we might get, at a major label, we might get a bigger artist knocking on our door saying, why aren't we getting a sync when this baby band have got a sync? So I think that's just, it's an interesting dynamic that it doesn't always, flow with the normal kind of statistics flowing around an artist.
Yeah, interesting. And then Ruth, from your side, so brand partnerships, what makes for a good partnership between an artist, without ruining your Fast 15 for tomorrow?
Yeah,
What makes for a good partnership?
I think kind of the purpose of this discussion is thinking about partnerships from an artist's perspective, and I think when you think of it from that point of view, I think firstly you have to acknowledge that the only equation that really matters these days is the one that involves artist and fan, and then you think about all of the parties that are kind of involved in that mix, and you only really have a place in the mix if you add something to that connection. I think the same thing applies to kind of what we do as well. I think, like Sync, what we do isn't new. It's kind of existed in some form or other since probably the 80s. I think where it's really moved on in the last few years and gotten a lot more sophisticated is it's just less transactional. It's less kind of short-termism, knee-jerk reactions. Yes, you can have conversations about kind of plugging funding gaps, et cetera, but I think where things feel really progressive and really meaningful in what we do is where you think about partnerships as a critical part of the marketing mix for an artist. And I think we've all dropped the B word, brand, for a reason in the last few years, because I think kind of much like with Sync, and again, not to spoil what we're gonna talk about tomorrow, but what's front and center in everything that we do is great creative and great storytelling. It isn't just about transaction or badging exercises, and I think people can smell those kind of relationships a mile off.
Okay, so it's got to have more integrity than just sticking a banner on something. Roxanne, do you pursue, and sorry, we will get into a conversation rather than me just quizzing you all one-on-one in depth at some point soon, but which do you pursue first, brand partnerships or sync? What would you chase? Who are you going to buy coffee for afterwards?
Oh man, you're totally putting me on the spot there. I think for all artists, well, obviously there's so many avenues you can go down now. So I would say whatever's right for you. And how well did I just dodge that? I've just started exploring sync, but really on a friend-to-friend and artist-to-artist level. So I've got friends who've just done some short movies and they wanted to use music, so obviously we partnered up for that. And the marriage of visual art and sound can be a really beautiful thing when done well. And if you're lucky, that can also be quite lucrative, I guess. So I'll buy Tim a coffee after this.
It's exciting, though, to hear that from an artist's perspective, it's that kind of creative element that excites you, because, you know, from a manager's perspective, obviously, there's money at the end of it, potentially, and exposure. And I think, you know, from a record label angle, actually, that's what we do, and I think this is what Reef does as well, is go and meet our artists and actually try and find out what, you know, floats their boat. What kind of things do they want to get involved in? Do they have an interest in a certain type of film or TV, or do they like sports? So shall we get them used on Sky Sports? Shall we get them on Soccer AM? All that sort of stuff. So yeah, that's very refreshing to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think probably here in kind of your response, a lot of caution that a lot of artists feel. I mean, I think apart for a second the fact that we both work at major labels, we actually have a really artist-friendly approach to everything we do. I think there's no mandated or templated approach to either sync or partnerships. It's always better to start with creative and artists and that insight, what they're passionate about. Again, because you know, the most authentic relationships, I think partnerships in both of our areas involve that kind of level of artist insight, really.
I think like when the conversation starts with creative, either on a sync side or a brand partnership side, you have the opportunity to instigate something and to create something together. You know, I think a problem or a great difficulty that I find with sync is that often it's, you know, you kind of offer your music up to the sync gods and you see if they will come down and bless it, and you get a nice check without having to spend any money, which is amazing but highly risky. You know, I can't guarantee, I can't write that into the cash flow, I can't predict and give the band a raise because I don't know if that's going to happen. But if the band, you know, says we really like this particular brand, we'd like to have a chat to them, maybe there's you know, a person in our team or an agency who can help connect us, and then you can start to have a conversation about, okay, well, is there a synergy between the audience? What kind of creative are you talking about? And then all of a sudden you have a really fruitful conversation that you can actually create and be a part of. Now, it has to be, you know, it always takes two to tango in these kinds of things. But I think there's, you know, at least in my experience, I see that the brand partnerships side being something you can be more proactive in as an artist or as a creative, whereas the sync side sometimes being a little bit harder, particularly with film and TV.
I think you're absolutely right. I think the sync side is added value that I think you should pursue, because why not? And maybe that's not you pursuing it, maybe that's engaging a sync agent or making sure your publisher or label are going out after sync. And I think, you know, you don't rely on sync. That's a problem that sometimes we have maybe as a label, is if it's not working elsewhere, we get a knock on our door and say, can you get a sync? And I think it's an interesting thing to actually consider, and we always go back and say, look, Radio 1 refresh their playlist every week. The Times, The Guardian, whoever writes about music every week, there's 5 or 6, 7 spots. There's one John Lewis ad a year, you know, and every single person's trying to get that John Lewis ad. So I think it's a really valid point. Don't put your eggs in just that basket. No,
like I think, you know, for the artists, I think for artists, there's only really 5 ways you can make money. Like, you know, endorsements in the form of brand partnerships or things like that, publishing, records, merchandise, and live. For Bears Den, everything we earn comes into one of those 5 categories. And we always try and think of that in terms of how we plan our income and also what kind of value we're getting for it. Not always financial. It can be other forms of capital, audience. You know, I think particularly with recordings, like we have a you know, a good recording business. I think we do pretty reasonably well for a band of our size. But really, we look at our recordings as being a tool to grow our audience. and everything else around that. And there's so many creative ways you can spin all of this. Like, you could give away music for, give away all your music for free and just sell top dollar for your tickets. You could tour with free concerts all over the country and try and sell as many CDs as you can, or try and sell T-shirts, or you could hand out free merch at a train station. Like, it doesn't really matter. Those individual decisions aren't the ones that make up the mix. It's the overall view, and going, what's your strategy for making money? What's your strategy for investing in things, and where are you reaping the benefit from it? I think you can get very creative with that.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that point. I think even you've made it, I think, in relation to partnerships, but I think the reason why we call it partnerships these days is because it isn't necessarily about a paycheck. Yes, quite often we are really proactive about creative propositions, either from our record labels where they've just got a great digital concept and we know it'll work for X set of progressive artists that want to do something in a particular space, or it can be led purely by artist insight, and it might be a passion project that sits alongside a kind of an album campaign. We'll take that to market. And sometimes it's about making great creative happen, or great idea happen. Sometimes it's about that in combination with a huge amount of media spend at a critical point in and around album sales or tour. And we'll quite often take a really level view of that. I think 5 years ago it was much less so. It was about pull a brief in, stick an artist in, shove it out the door again. And now a huge amount of what we do, and I think we all kind of talk about it a lot, is very proactive. I think it's kind of a great point well made.
Yeah, maybe an example. Bastion did a partnership with Bose last year. Bastion's a alternative indie folk band. Branding is not necessarily the most coolest of areas to look at, but Bose is a credible music brand. The band are fans of those products, and there was a discussion about doing something tasteful. We did a bunch of sessions for them, filmed in Chicago. They became these great kind of native videos on Facebook, and there was some money involved, but the real benefit for us was actually the media spend behind it. There was hundreds of thousands of dollars going behind these Facebook native videos that were getting millions of views, whereas the rest of the content that we put up, even when we put a little bit of spend behind it, just doesn't have anywhere near the impact. So all of a sudden, the band's reaching a huge audience of people who are audiophiles, or there's a common ground there. And that was hugely beneficial. And then also out of that relationship, kind of working on the videos and the sessions together, and the band having dialogue with the brand and being able to craft something tasteful, which is great for the brand and great for us as well. There's also a relationship there, so that as we move forward into what we're doing, I can pick up the phone and talk to Bose and say, well, okay, we want to give away 50 headphones to our fans. And they'll probably give it to us, but I don't know, we'll see. But the fact is that those kinds of conversations can come about when you are thinking less of it as kind of a give me the paycheck, and more of it as a how do we find common ground and common benefit.
Absolutely, I'd say that's probably a best-in-class example of just you start a relationship that makes sense in some way, shape or form. You're talking to the same people, you've got a common cause or a common story you're trying to tell, and you see that relationship grow. I think that's kind of the critical shift in what we do in kind of the last 5 years or so.
I definitely think that sort of bigger picture view is really important, and I think with Sync, actually I sort of disagree on some levels about the 5 areas of income. I think Sync can be one of them. You look at a band like Sigur Rós, for example, who are everywhere. There's certain bands that just connect, and for them, Sync is a massive financial avenue for them. It's a revenue stream. But I think the bigger picture attitude is really important, and we get people knocking on our doors and saying, can you help us out? We need some money for tour support or whatever, so perhaps you could help us with a sync. And actually, we could get them a sync that doesn't pay a lot of money right now, but down the line, maybe the band is discovered, maybe it's a FIFA sync, for example. A lot of people discover music on FIFA these days. It's as powerful to be on FIFA as it is to be played on St. Lo's show, some would argue, and people are playing it day in, day out, and people discover bands that way. It's that curation that comes with some syncs these days that I think is really important to look at.
Fantastic. So about more than just money in most settings, even the sync kind of side of things, not just the brand partnerships. Are there questions out here? Yeah, I can't see whose hand it is, but yes.
As a consumer, I'm aware that everybody wants me to spend money, but I don't feel like I've been educated in the best way to spend it. So I've got a budget of, say, 30 quid a month to spend on live, on a streaming service, on physical music and merch. How do you want me to spend it? If you're a fan of the band, come to the band and we'll show you where to go. that's, I think, a core part of the business model of what artists should be doing. We use a lot of direct-to-fan commerce solutions. I guess fundamentally we look at the center of everything that we're doing is a relationship between an artist communicating their art to an audience, and everything else around that is supportive of that original relationship. So if you're a fan of an artist, go to the artist, and then, if you want a shirt, you should be able to buy one from their web store. And you know that if it's their web store, then they're the ones getting benefit from it because you want to support them or you want to get something from them at the best price. It's the same for tickets, You want to... I think it's really important for artists to try and defend the rights of their fans in terms of making sure that tickets are affordable and that you're not paying, $9 in postage fees for a piece of paper that could be just emailed to you. I think all these things, the artist and the fan are aligned, and they want common benefit, and they want to. The artist wants to give best benefit to the fan, and the fan wants to give best benefit to the artist. So there's other things around that surround it, but I would always say, if you have a budget, then go to the band, decide what you want to buy from them and how you can contribute or what it is that you're into, and hopefully I think a smart band will direct you to the best and most profitable and fairest way of doing that.
Roxanne, what would you add to that? After I stole your microphone.
Well, I definitely agree with that, and luckily we live in a world now where you can talk to your favorite bands directly, and more often than not, they'll actually answer. So I've had people write to me, which I thought was so sweet, and say, hey, your EP's for sale on iTunes, I can buy a physical copy from the record label or from you, what's better for you? Which I thought was very considerate, very nice. But also, spending the money is one thing, and then how it gets distributed is another. I think to the whole future of the music industry and going forward, that's one point that I really wanted to get to and put across, because I think the money that's kind of been overlooked previously in the music business, like the small income from royalties, live royalties, that was kind of peanuts back in the day, is now really important. And it's just so intransparent. So that's something that needs to, the small music venues are struggling because they have to pay quite a substantial fee to have live music. And then how does that money actually get distributed? Does it land with the right artists, et cetera, et cetera? So I think more transparency in distributing the money that does get generated by goodwill and music lovers is important.
Perfect, I'd agree. Let's go, another question. Melissa.
What's the best way for independent artists to pursue syncs?
What's the best way for independent artists to pursue syncs?
I think it depends on the type of sync, because sync's so broad. Obviously, there's in sync we'd say that having your music used on film, TV, advertising, computer games, charity, corporate, they're all branded as sync. So I think it's kind of know your market as an independent artist. If you're a heavy metal band, it's very rare that you're going to be used on an advertising campaign. Or if you're, singing about heartbreak or death, Morrison's aren't going to use you on their grocery campaign. So it sounds like basics, but think about who you're going to target first. So if you feel like film is where you want to go, I think, to your point, I think knowing people that create film is a really good starting point, because it's like this conference. It's a new generation of filmmakers. You want to be amongst those people because you can grow with them. I think getting a sync agent can be very good. Can be very lucrative if you get the right person. Just be careful on the kind of agreements that some of these agents send you, especially in the States, because they take some of your rights, and you should never, sign away your rights just to someone over an email. So a sync agent's very important. What we're doing at Warner is we set up a publishing arm called W Songs, which operates short-term publishing agreements with no advances, and you can get out them within 30 days. And we're kind of on the lookout and kind of approaching people and spreading the word that if there's bands out there that we feel are great for sync, come and talk to us, because what we can do is we can use our sister company Warner Chappell to go out and collect your royalties from live and radio, but also as a sync team, UK and globally, we'll go out and find opportunities for sync. So I think outside the box a little bit with who you speak to. Advertising is really tough because it's, you know, the big companies and it's all about relationships. And that's, I guess, where we you know, we blossom against perhaps some of the smaller labels. It's just that we have a lot of clout. So I think, you know, build those relationships slowly, attend events, attend conferences. Networking is the best thing you can do. Sorry?
I'll buy you a coffee.
Okay, a beer.
Beer.
Yeah. Yeah. I can come tomorrow because I'm going to talk a little bit about it tomorrow as well.
And then Ruth, same question. How would you approach, as a hypothetical Canadian singer-songwriter with a poppy, folky voice, approaching brands?
I think always think about authenticity first. Like, who would you like to partner with? Who do you think kind of connects in some way, shape or form? Audience, via audience or creative with kind of what you do. And then I think it's something I'm going to talk a bit about tomorrow actually, but just always be disciplined about packaging up, for want of a better phrase, your approach. You know, there's nothing wrong with being proactive. There's a huge amount of probably what we all do in this area, which is kind of based on that. But it's really thinking about what will value look like to another party. So thinking about, what you need out of it, which is whether or not that's exposure or money or some kind of other support like media spend, but also kind of really research once you've kind of thought about a list of targets, and sometimes it's as rudimentary as that, what their priorities are, whether or not you can see that they've got profile on particular social media channels, they've got like a digital content stream, they've got a live music program, they're in sponsorship in X area, and just think about ways in which you can pull your story out across those kind of areas.
Fantastic, thank you. Helena, there's a mic coming to you.
Sorry to ask a question about fees, but to both of you two, how have the fee structures changed in, say, the last couple of years? Are people paying more or less? What's happening with it?
I suppose the middles come out a little bit. So we're still doing, you know, I'm not going to tell you numbers, get fired, but we're still doing massive deals for the big superstars that we have on our label. But we're doing a lot more smaller deals. And I think that's where we're concentrating a lot of our time, because when you're seeing those middle deals pop out, ultimately as a label, you know, as a sync function within a label, we're there to create opportunities for marketing more and more. But also we're a sales function. We have to make money for the label. We help there. So we're going after those smaller deals, and whether it be a catwalk video for ASOS, or whether it be doing something for a football club for the online channel where we're just getting 500 quid. We're doing a load more of those things. So I think definitely the middle's gone out.
And then Ruth, from a brand partnership point of view, similar, so an abundance of small deals on top of the big stuff?
Yeah, and I think you can do that so long as it's, it doesn't feel like overkill. I think we've probably, a lot of people in this room will see examples of artists working in this space and it feeling like they're making money and brand partnerships ahead of being a musician and kind of building that story and remaining rooted in that. I think there's probably some similarities in terms of general trends over the last few years. I think marketing budgets have to work a lot harder for brands as well as for record labels. So it's kind of about justifying the expenditure. And as we've talked about a few times, I think we've started taking, I think quite rightly, a much more holistic view of kind of what partnerships are worth. I think brands that come in and out of an artist's career just for the sake of like one big PR moment, you know, that might be relevant for a certain artist in a certain time and a certain objective. But if you can kind of get them to spend in lots of little ways over a period of time and kind of see that grow with you, I think that's probably a better route to take.
And then for the artists in the room, the fact that you've got more small payments taking place, yes, you're getting slightly less money, but you're creating more opportunities because the money's being divided up smaller, but it can create, wider exposure. I just broke the rule of moderating where you're not going to make points. Come with a question, please. Sure.
We've been talking a lot about pretty conventional ways of making money right now, but the panel's called the future of the music making money. So I was curious to know what the future is there, and Roxanne touched upon it for a second. So how are we going to make money in the future?
Okay, most inventive ways of making money in the future that are not science fiction. Rowan or Roxanne, do you want to start us off?
I think a few things for us that we're looking at in terms of preparing for the future of what we're doing. You know, I think touring is a very important part of what we do. Ticket pricing is variable between different markets. So looking at the trends in which, the amount of money people will pay to go to a concert, those are things that are shifting a little bit. So that affects the way we prepare and plan our touring and what cities we go to and cities that we can't go to because the show's too big to afford to do it. So things like that. So we look very proactively at where our audience is. The band we do all our e-commerce and a huge percentage of our tickets through Muziekgebouw, and that tells us where those fans are. So we're much more tactical about where we tour and how we tour and why we tour.
And so on that point then, when you get to playing in bigger venues and the venue has a preferred ticket supplier, how do you get to keep hold of that inventory, keep hold of that relationship, get hold of your fan in that situation?
Again, very different from country to country, based upon artists that have gone before us, that have fought battles and pushed the boundaries, and then we can try and push them a little bit further. I think, as was alluded to in a panel earlier today, or in a talk by Susie at Muziekgebouw, it's really a power struggle. If you're an act and you're going to sell out the venue, and you can sell it out quicker if you're going to sell it directly to your fans, then that's a reasonable argument to be presenting to the promoter and to the venue. So a lot of the time what we usually do, for Bastion as an example, in fact we do this with Tiger Town, they're announcing a tour tomorrow, and we have in Australia 20% allocations on most of the venues, which is quite standard for down there. And I'm pretty confident that we will sell out that 20% pretty quickly, and guess who's going to be on the phone calling the venues and calling the promoters saying, okay, well, collectively we want to sell out the venues, we want to sell out the show, I've sold my 20%, you've sold 10%, give me more tickets. And we keep stepping that up all the way through until we sell 60 or 70 or sometimes more percentage of the tickets, because fans come to us, as we talked about earlier. If you're a fan of the band, come to the band. We can direct you the best ways. We'll get you the best price ticket. We'll make sure you're looked after, and you can always email the band and I'll be the one who answers your questions, or one of our team. So it's quite holistic in that regard. So I think this kind of direct connection, as an example of that touring, in terms of how we plan touring and how we monetize touring, but also in terms of how we monetize our merchandising. We're not, Bastion's not going to have a T-shirt in Topshop unless we become a big pop band all of a sudden, which is not the vision of the band. But we can sell huge numbers of T-shirts because by just setting up something as a print on demand online and letting the market and letting the fans drive the momentum and the income. So we're trying to look at variable ways of making income that new technology provides us with opportunities to do it. So things that require less upfront risk from us, that open up revenue streams, as well as you alluded to earlier, kind of hoovering up the pennies and cents that are strewn throughout the music universe that have been forgotten for years and years and years, and they really do add up. Our publishing royalty statements are 300 pages long because it has 2 cents from Bulgaria for one song and da-da-da-da. But all of that, is quite a significant percentage of the overall income. So there's a couple of examples, but I think, technology is a real driver of new ways to make money or new ways to find money that already exists that you haven't got.
I think the point about technology as well is really interesting from a sync perspective, because we're doing more deals with streaming services now that just haven't been done before. Whereas, there's a blanket license in the UK, so anyone can use commercial music, any of the stations can use commercial music, but there aren't blanket licenses in place for Netflix and Amazon Prime, and then there's a load more of these streaming services that are coming out the woodwork day in different countries. So I think what we're trying to do as well from our sync world in terms of the future of making money is look at how we can do different deals with streaming services and partners now. And that also might mean that when people pause, like on Amazon Prime, when they pause the show, they can see what music's been used, and then they can click through to buy the album, all that sort of stuff.
And then for platforms like Twitch as well, you've got music being used as people watch other people play games, which is weird to me, but it seems
Absolutely.
to work.
Just a point on technology, though, it's funny, isn't it, that vinyl's had this massive resurgence. We talk about technology driving music and revenue, and I know largely it is, but you look at vinyl and what a comeback.
Perfect. Another question from the floor. And sorry, I'm trying not to talk about virtual reality in case Benji wants to talk about it a bit later. Licensing issue for Tim for later. Volunteer some questions. Does no one want to make any money? I'm confused.
I was just wondering your opinion on the whole streaming debate. Is it always a good thing to do it, or should you sometimes aim at keeping your music more exclusive, i.e. forcing your customers or your fans to buy more expensive physical media such as vinyl? and stuff like that?
I think unless you're already really successful, that's not going to work. Because I think every consumer, I hate that word, but there you go, has their own favorite place to discover and consume music. And the people that stream my songs on Spotify are not the people that will buy it off iTunes or who will buy a physical copy. I find there are different groups of people consuming music in different ways. And if you're not, it depends what your goals are, obviously, but if you're looking to gain more fans and reach more people with your music, if you don't have your music on a certain platform, I think that's just limiting yourself. However, it depends on your campaign and your strategy. So if you want to have it on Bandcamp only, so you can control all the data for the first, 4 weeks from release, and then have it on streaming services such as Spotify, etc., that's something else. But I personally think it's like forcing people to consume one certain way or from one place. That's just not going to work.
I think it can make an interesting story at times. The kind of most obvious example is what a lot of artists do on Record Store Day, where there are certain recordings or products that are only available in certain formats, and that's what makes them special. And it's talked about in the media. It creates social media activity, but it's really a marketing exercise. Availability, and as you say, people. For some people, discovering new music is about them, going down to their local record store and flicking through the vinyl. For other people, it's going through the discovery playlist on Spotify. For other people, it's through YouTube and through videos and sessions and recordings of concerts. All in various ways with various revenue streams that come into them. But again, it's about figuring out how you want to present yourself, what the benefit is and what the strategy is. I think if you're going to restrict people, then go, well, what's the purpose of it? And what's the end goal? And how are we going to try and turn things around for monetizing?
Completely agree. To give an example of people having their fixed way of doing things, so In Rainbow's Radiohead album got given away for free and was simultaneously the most pirated content that had ever been known as an album. So 400,000 illegal downloads on the day of content available legitimately for free. Because the logic was that people go where they go. That was a phenomenally successful album, but that happened.
I think also, just to go back to that, I was talking about an example with Bastion when they started, and when we hand-stamped with potato stamps CDs. And part of the reason of doing that was they were only available in physical form. They weren't available digitally. But part of the reason of doing it that way was because when people came and bought that CD and knew that the band had done it by themselves, and there was video content that we did online that showed the band making these in a backyard with their friends, and it became part of the emotional value of that product. So whenever people listen to that music, they think of an exchange with the band when they bought it at the show, or they think about the process by which the band made it. And so, really for us, that was more functioning as a piece of merch rather than as just a piece of accessing music. So I think there are other reasons to restrict from certain platforms, because you can kind of morph and twist the product into different value propositions for your fans. Give them things that they want, things that they can connect with, things that are special, that are limited, that are are creative, that share that bond, and so as I was explaining, that bond between the art creator and the fan of the art being the center of everything and every decision that you're making. Just think about things in that frame of reference, I think.
Fantastic. Panel, any last killer points you wanted to make that I didn't lead you to? That's great feedback from the panel. One last question from the floor. Henry.
One thing I've noticed recently, which seems to be a trend, particularly amongst bigger artists, is the tendency to hold back stuff on Spotify, particularly from Adele and Coldplay, which I guess maybe their managers and labels see as a way of putting pressure on Spotify to do something about the freemium problem. But I just wanted to know, do you guys think that's actually constructive? Because to me, it seems like it could end up damaging the whole Spotify proposition.
Let's go from the far end. Short answer each. See where we end up.
I can understand why they want to do it. I think both of those examples are artists who are in a very unique position. The same for Taylor Swift. The fact is, most of us aren't in that position. We don't have the power to do that, and it's not particularly constructive. I think in my opinion, I think they're anomalies. I don't think they change the game by having 3 major artists who aren't on it. And I know there's more, but does that stop most people from subscribing? I don't really think so. I think it's an interesting marketing tactic. It's quite a shock tactic at the moment, and I think it'll probably fizzle out. I don't think it's going to be that productive, particularly as the audience on streaming grows and the revenue grows, and it becomes the dominant, or I believe it will become the dominant form of recorded music income. Then I think everyone's going to want to be in that race. Just it's kind of like saying if you withheld your music from iTunes back in the day when iTunes started, it was probably could have been something a bit more shocking. But yeah, I guess I see it as a bit of a PR stunt, and good on them, and they make some good money off selling records. But it's not a model that I'd be pursuing or recommending to any of the acts that I work with.
Roxanne, what do you reckon?
Well, I agree. The artists that pull that off have that clout to pull it off. But just again, with streaming and with all these things, I think the problem is more how the general revenue gets distributed and the lack of transparency in that. So I think that's the much bigger problem, really, rather than, streaming, should I have my album on it or not? It's more the question, well, how much money is made and how much should I get from that and why?
Tim and Ruth were a bit out of the norm for you guys, but if you've got an opinion, interesting.
I mean, I still haven't bought Adele's album, and it really annoys me that I can't listen to it on Spotify. So, I think if you're a new artist, I think personally, I think you're a fool not to be on Spotify, because you get the thing like the Fresh Finds playlist, all the really cool curation that they do, and I think it's really beneficial to be part of that platform. I think it's a PR stunt if you're a massive artist, but massively frustrating as a fan. So I wouldn't do it.
Ruth?
This is the final point. I think it was touched upon in the previous panel. I think all of those, I know it's a complicated dialogue and debate, but all of those metrics that are outputted from kind of streaming, they're so important with regards to building new artists and building artist profiles. And radio stations do look at a complicated set of data these days. I just don't think you can afford to have those blind spots and for them not to be able to have those metrics when they're kind of used day in, day out. Yeah,
maybe you're doing yourself a bit of a disservice if you're not on these platforms, particularly with the fan insights back end of Spotify now. I know all our dominant age brackets. I know geo information. I know genders. I know all of this key information. I know where the revenue's coming from, which playlists. It's a huge amount of information that really informs the decisions that we're making in other areas of our business. So yeah, it's not just a revenue. It's not just a revenue conversation, it's an information conversation, and being able to find that out is really useful.
Fantastic. We're out of time for this one. Guys, thank you very much indeed. Really enjoyed that.